Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Well, today I'd like to talk about something a little different, but it's still motorcycle related, trust me. I've seen a lot of good safety videos on how to ride a motorcycle, and there's a lot of good videos out there. Most of them have to do with technique and recognizing hazards and such, but I haven't really seen much discussion of what it takes to have a good mindset, not only just to enjoy yourself, but to be safe and to be able to properly react to threats that you're going to encounter on the roadway. So I've come across some books a few years ago, and it helped crystallize my thinking in terms of my approach to how I ride and how do I deal with other people on the roadway. There's a type of thought, Western thought, that followed on from one of the schools of Socrates, as it were, over 2,000 years ago, and that's called Stoic philosophy. And you might have heard more about it this year than in the past. This year actually has turned out to be a good year for people who are able to understand and practice the concepts of Stoic philosophy. But a lot of it really got started with a former Greek slave over 2,000 years ago, a guy named Epictetus. And he didn't write anything. One of his students distilled a lot of his more common teachings into a handbook. And the handbook's pretty distilled. It's pretty intense and meaty, as it were. But there's a lot of good ideas in there about how a person really should conduct themselves successfully, especially when dealing with others. And then later on, a few hundred years later, you have one of the last good Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius, and he has a collection of writings called Meditations. Now, he did not intend to have this published. These were his own personal journals, and he had given orders to his subordinates to burn all his journals upon his death, and they couldn't bear to do it because they realized there were a lot of good things in there. And then some of the other Stoic authors that were clearly writing for a broader audience, not only of their time, but they anticipated that their writings would go down through the ages, and it did. People like Seneca or Cicero, again, people that wrote in ancient Roman times 2,000 years ago. And to bring things a little more up to date, a man, he has since passed away, but one of the more amazing individuals you'll ever hear or read about, and I hope many of you have already had heard of him, and that is Admiral James Stockdale. He was a prisoner of war at the so-called Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam for 7.5 years. 4 of those 7.5 years he was held in solitary confinement. He was subject to regular and brutal torture and beatings. But as the most senior officer, he was responsible for organizing all the men there to form a resistance against the communist captors. And he was very successful. He helped develop a TAP code. He helped the men form a cohesive unit of resistance. And he helped them get through those very tough times. And I will talk about how this relates to motorcycling here shortly. I just want to lay the groundwork. But he was known to have had a copy of Epictetus's handbook on his nightstand before he was shot down. He was on the first bombing run after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in Vietnam, and he was shot down. And even at the beginning of the war, they had pretty ridiculous rules of engagement. The American fighter pilots had to fly in on a very narrowly defined bombing path. They could only come in one way, and they could only go out one way, so they were sitting ducks for anti-aircraft fire. And of course, he was shot down. And as his parachute deployed, and as he's drifting to the ground in Hanoi, he sees all these civilians running to come get him. And it wasn't the welcome party, by the way. And sure enough, he was tackled and brutalized, and his leg was broken in the melee, and he suffered with an unhealed broken leg the entire time of his captivity. But while he was floating down in his parachute, because he lived the Stoic philosophy, he's looking down thinking, well, in a little while, you're going to be spending a few years down here, and it's not going to be pleasant. But he told himself he was going to get through it. So very, very interesting man. If all you know about him is that he participated in the 1992 vice presidential debates against Al Gore and Dan Quayle, then you're really missing out. I mean, of course, like the media tends to do, they made fun of this guy's how he portrayed himself at the debate. He's not a professional politician. He was told a week ahead of time that he was going to be in this debate. He only did it as a favor to Ross Perot. Ross Perot had done a lot for families of POWs. So a very honorable man, certainly outclassed anybody else in that room just by being there. But so what are the central tenets of Stoic philosophy that could allow somebody to get through these difficult experiences, and how do they relate to motorcycle riding? Well, first of all, with Stoic philosophy, they have what's called the dichotomy of control. That is, there's basically two types of things in the world: things you can control and things you can't control. And certainly there's more things that you can't control that you can control. And then to the extent that things happen to you because of things you can't control, you still have a choice about how you react to that. So let's say someone cuts you off in traffic. You're on your bike and somebody merges in without looking. You couldn't control that. Maybe you could have been more attentive, scan further ahead, covering your brake, your brake controls, your clutch. But sometimes things just happen so quickly that you really can't control it. So what do? Do you fly into a rage and get out of your head and make yourself vulnerable to something else that happens in traffic? Many years ago, I used to get upset like that in traffic. And then it just hit me that, hey, I'm riding my motorcycle to have fun. And if I'm so angry at all these people because they're boneheads and they don't know how to drive in traffic or they're not attentive, then it upset me, and then I realized I'm not having fun anymore. So, I don't try and retaliate. I've done it in the past. I'm not trying to sound like I'm better than anybody. I'm just trying to learn from my own experience. I think many of you that watch this channel are certainly have been around and are certainly experienced. So I'd just be curious if this at all makes sense to you. But you see videos where somebody feels like they were wronged in traffic. They're riding a bike and they quickly catch up to the car and try and knock the side mirror off or kick the side of the car. And so sometimes these motorcyclists wreck in the process. I mean, what does any of that prove? I mean, kind of some of the dumb things I've done in the past is catch up to somebody at a light and I'm screaming at them through a full-face helmet with the visor closed, and they've got their window rolled up. I mean, if I'm the driver, I'm looking at me, I just see this. What was the point of that? So, the thing that was amazing about Admiral Stockdale, and he was a vice admiral, Medal of Honor winner. He writes a book in the 90s about his experiences, and the author's James Stockdale. I mean, the ultimate in humility and modesty. He doesn't have to brag. He's already lived it. But he was actually grateful for his time in captivity, which is odd. It wasn't a Stockholm Syndrome thing. He was grateful because he viewed anything worthwhile came from the crucible of heat and pressure, the trial by fire. I mean, it's a warrior mindset. And if we could just take a small piece of this and apply it to our motorcycle riding, I think it's going to make us a safer, more effective, and enjoy our rides a lot more. Seneca, and of course these are modern translations in terms of title, but How to Keep Your Cool. His take on it was, it's like the Incredible Hulk. Bruce Banner, don't make him angry because you wouldn't like him when he's angry. Seneca's take is if you can avoid getting angry in general, that's the best. But if you do, just let it wash over you without taking any action. Just give yourself some detachment and just observe the situation, and it enables you to continue processing what's going on around you. And then both Cicero and Seneca wrote books, and they sound morbid, like how to die, how to grow old. It's not fixated with death. What their points are in these books is how to keep living your life and don't just merely exist. Don't live like you're already dead, and don't try and extend your life by avoiding life and avoiding risks. Just manage your risks. So again, as motorcycle riders, we understand that what we do is more risky than riding a car in almost every case. So, but we do it because it's something that's important to us. It's meaningful to us. We enjoy it. So what comes along with that, we manage the risks accordingly. So to me, it's pretty interesting. Going back to how you react in traffic. One of the central tenets was people adhere to Stoic philosophy is they don't see themselves as victims, ever. Admiral Stockdale didn't see himself as a victim. He just saw himself as somebody that had to deal with a really tough set of circumstances, and he did very effectively. So, if I'm getting angry, I'm making a choice, and I'm telling people, hey, I'm a victim because you were inconsiderate or thoughtless and how you drove, and so I'm going to choose to be a victim, and I'm going to be angry about it, and I'm going to try and retaliate against a vehicle that weighs several times more than my vehicle, and I have all the vulnerabilities as far as having no protective enclosure around me, whereas you have everything around you. I mean, it's futile. So, what I like to do is somebody does something stupid in traffic, I don't waste time trying to honk them. If I can honk to alert somebody to avoid something, I will, but I won't let it distract me from what I'm trying to do. I don't flip people off anymore. I did that when I was young. Again, why? Well, you try to make people madder than you are, and it could lead to really surprising things. I actually honked at a guy who was drifting into my lane just as a warning, and the guy just became unhinged. And I thought, man, there's some people out there who knows what they're dealing with. So to me, I just think it was interesting that I could see how motorcycling, riding could relate to this ancient philosophy. Just a small piece of it. I'm not comparing myself to a Stockdale by any means, but what got him through that experience was his mindset, and that's my general point. If you've got the right mindset when you're riding a motorcycle, you want to be safe, you have the skills, you're not taking unnecessary risks like riding impaired or riding beyond your limits, and you're controlling everything that you can control, and then try to react against everything else that's out there effectively. And in a way, if somebody cuts you off and you slow down and nothing happens, you can choose at that moment to get mad, or you could say, hey, I'm glad I avoided that. I've got the skills. I was looking ahead. Another thing that people adhere to Stoic philosophy do, at the end of the day, it's kind of like an after action report. And they think back through the day about what could they have done better. What did they do good? What did they handle well? What could have been handled better? I try and do this on my ride, even if it's a 20-second thought process when I get back. I did this recently. My son and I were riding on a highway, and we passed a group of slow-moving cars, and then we passed another group of cars, and then the next thing you know, we're going way too fast. And I got back and I told my son, you know what? We got caught up in this whole thing of passing everybody on the road. And the big thing with Stoic philosophy is don't expect things that's not reasonable to expect. During the first shutdown, the roads were deserted, so I thought it was a good time. I had my one son behind me on the seat, and I had another son riding his motorcycle, and we're on a 2-lane highway, and next thing you know, a young guy in a Dodge Charger blasts by at about 150 miles an hour. I think he had that thing topped out, followed by the highway patrol. And I scan my mirrors regularly, but because of the terrain and I was doing 60 and he was doing 150, he's closing on us at 130 feet per second. I mean, he passed us before I even knew he was behind us, which really shook me up. So I shouldn't have had that expectation, even that the roads were quiet, that something like that couldn't happen. Or if I find a nice twisty piece of road and I'm like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go through there, and there's some guy in an RV up ahead. I just well, that's how it worked out. If I'm really wanting to take that road on my own, I may pull over, take a break, and then see if I can tackle that road on my own. But if I'm still stuck following a camper, then that's how the cookie crumbles. So that's what I have for today. If you have any thoughts on this topic, I'd really be interested in your comments down below. So thanks very much.